So, first of all, we couldn't have the fire if we didn't have the bridge. So, there we go. So we want to go back to the 1880s and think about Poughkeepsie. So, the presentation was supposed to be given, as I say, with Bill, so I'm really sorry that he's not here. And I see some of the firefighters already looking at the two pictures up there. These are actually in the slideshow, so we'll get to talk about them later. But let's go back to the 1880s. So the Poughkeepsie-Highland Railroad Bridge opened in January of 1889, and it was still in use in 1974 when the fire happened. This is one of the proposed plans that was never built. And to go back to the 1880s, one of the first ideas came from Matthew Vassar. And his idea was to build a bridge across the Hudson. And in case you didn't know, this was the first bridge to be built between Albany and New York City. There was no other bridge. Going back to Matthew Vassar, very industrious man, he could see the future. He could see that Poughkeepsie was growing. It was becoming a great connector for many other places. And he thought building a bridge would get all the raw materials from the west to the east. So he started talking about it. And you can guess what people said. No way, it's never going to happen. How can they build a bridge that length? How can it hold trains? That's just ridiculous. And fast forward to the 1990s, I'm sure some of you said that to Bill Seppi and Fred Schaefer. Don't be silly, it'll never happen. And guess what? Here we are, Fred. So, that was 1842. Fast forward 1868. Another plan. This was in the Poughkeepsie Eagle this time. And that's when people began to think, these people are crazy. It's just never going to happen. 1871, Harvey Eastman and Jonathan Platt advocated for the bridge, and they actually did something about it. So they formed the Poughkeepsie Bridge Company, and they actually started plans and different ideas of how this could actually happen. But again, it didn't come to fruition. It wasn't until 1886 that the bridge was approved and building began. It was begun by the Union Bridge Company. The designers, Thomas Clark and Charles MacDonald, and they had already built a railway bridge across a river. So people began thinking, maybe this will work after all. So, Poughkeepsie Railroad Bridge was completed December 1888 at a height of 212 feet, so that ships could easily pass under it, and it was the first crossing across the Hudson. That's a picture, two pictures of the bridge being built. And if you can just picture yourself living in either the west or the east side, looking up and seeing this structure taking place and beginning to form, it must have been really absolutely magical to watch it and wonder, and just wonder what was going to happen next. This is actually the bridge in the early 1990s. It's one of the postcards. There's a whole bunch of wonderful postcards that give you some wonderful pictures of the bridge. Facts about the bridge. So, it was finished in December of 1888, but it was actually January of 1890 when the first train came across the bridge. And of course, it did not go any further. It came over here, stopped, and then it went back again, because the other network of railways were not yet built. The Maybrook line, which became a huge hub for everything, was thought about and was beginning to take place, but it wasn't open yet. When opened, it was the longest bridge in the world and the first Hudson River rail crossing between Albany and New York City. 6,768 feet, but not for long. It lost its title a year and 3 months later. And it lost its title to a new railway bridge in Scotland. called the Fourth Rail Bridge. Both bridges very similar, called cantilever and truss bridges, built with steel. New idea, build bridges with steel, they last longer. Well, guess what? We now have the walkway over that steel, and the bridge in Scotland still carries trains. So quite fun, amazing. The steel cantilever truss bridge was very popular in the late 1880s because they needed it to be strong, and it was one of the stronger structures for heavy locomotive trains. In addition to freight trains, the bridge carried passenger trains connecting Boston, New York, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington. And the trolley cars were really modified for all sorts of things on the bridge. So they served tourists, students, shoppers. They came from New Paltz to go to Lucky Platts. Special West Point football trains, milk trains, trains for hogs and cattle, and the circus. Bill has a cousin who lived under the bridge and who used to say that once a year she would stay up all night to listen to the train coming with the circus and all the animals, so they could hear the elephants and the tigers and everybody making noises. Quite fascinating. So, this is a picture that I've used in some of my tours. And it's really hard to explain to somebody what a cantilever truss bridge is. So when I found this diagram, I thought it was really neat. And I started using it when I was giving tours. But it wasn't a very clear picture. So I had to go back and find the source and redo the picture for this presentation. And lo and behold, I don't know if you can read what it says at the bottom, but it says, model illustrating the principle of the fourth bridge. So it's actually the bridge in Scotland that beat our bridge in length. And if you look at the structure of it, our cantilever and truss is all under the bridge. So when you walk the bridge, you really can't see what kind of bridge it is because it's all underneath. In the bridge in Scotland, it's on top and in bottom, and the train goes where the truss is in the middle. The train passes through the whole middle of the cantilever and truss. So just very interesting. And I love that I chose a picture that was actually of a Scottish bridge. And that's another nice postcard. Nice view of what was underneath us. More bridge facts. At the peak, as many as 3,500 rail cars crossed the bridge each day. And I read that wrong the first time I read it. I thought, how can 3,500 trains cross a bridge in one day? But it's not the train, it's all the cars that are attached to the train. So 3,500. So this was a really, really busy rail. There was 2 sets of tracks until 1918, when gauntlet track, also called interleave track, was installed to handle the weight of the heavier locomotives. And they actually had to do some adjustments in the middle of the bridge and make it a little wider and a little stronger in certain places to have this happen. During World War II, the bridge was painted black so that any German bombers coming over would not see the bridge. A lot of troops crossed the bridge regularly, so they wanted to safeguard that. That's the only time that the bridge has ever been painted, and it will never be painted again because the engineers say that oxidation is necessary, and to leave it the way it is, it will last longer. Funny story, World War II, a lot of young women lived under the bridge this side, and when the troops came across, the troops would throw off letters so that people could mail them for them, and also sent their IDs so that the ladies could write to the troops. So interesting time. After World War II, traffic began slowing down in the bridge. And there was better infrastructure for trucking and air freight industries. And by 1974, there was only 1 train per day crossing the Hudson. So what a difference, from when it started and then, trailed off to just 1 train a day. This is one of my favourite pictures that is taken. That's a steamer that the lady is looking up. And again, it just fascinates me that these people have never seen a bridge like this before. To be on the river and look up and see this structure 212 feet above you must have been just awesome. And to you know, they were all proven wrong. You know, this bridge was successful and it did hold a lot of trains. So, in case you didn't know, there was more than one fire. There was actually 3 fires on the bridge. First fire, May 1st, 1964, sparks from a train caused a small fire. But didn't get to anything else because at that time, it was maintained by workers. They had rain barrels and water barrels, and they had hose and taps with water. So in 1974, it was put out. They saw it, they put it out. Sorry, 1964. May 8th, 1974. Sparks again caused the fire. This time it took 10.5 hours to put the fire out, and 700 feet of the bridge was destroyed. So why was that? Because the owners of the bridge decided that this was not a feasible venture anymore. Let it just sit there. There was no maintenance crew. They had let the hoses, they hadn't turned off the water during the winter, and all the hoses were cracked, and there was no water on the bridge. So this time, the fire burned for a couple of hours before anybody even saw it. And then there was another fire on July 4th, 1982, and this time, it did take several hours. It was successfully put out because they used the water from the river to shoot up. So they had, you know, they were able to do that. So this is the last day of the railroad. 12:42, the last train with 100 cars crossed the bridge in the afternoon of May 8th, 1974. 2:08, first clouds of black smoke were seen. Many stories and opinions about what caused this, but many feel that the sparks from the great brakes were to blame. And because of Penn Central's lack of water with broken pipes and no maintenance, the fire quickly spread before it was reported. So for me, this is the events. It was like a catalyst that set in motion the sequence of events that would eventually lead to the creation of the Walkway Over the Hudson. So I think it's important to commemorate that day and to really thank all the firefighters and the mutual aid who were out that day putting out this fire. There was no lives lost, and there was some damage to houses underneath. There was, you know, damage to the bridge. But other than that, I mean, we have several today that fought the fire. So we're going to hear more about that now. Okay, so this is a quote from the Captain Thomas Ringwood. And this is what he said. It may not have been the biggest fire, but it was the most difficult. Shouldn't have been, but it was. Took 125 firefighters and over 10 hours before the fire was extinguished. Jamie made this whole list, which we're not going to read, but you can see these are all the firefighters and some of the mutual aid who took part in that fire. And I'm going to pass this over to Steve Van Buren now. He's going to give us some information about the slides that are now coming up. Okay? And we'll have a question and answer. And if anybody wants to share any stories of what they were doing on May 8th, 1974, we'd love to hear them.
To the right?
To the right. Mm-hmm.
You don't know me. If anybody can't hear me, raise your hand. You too. Good afternoon. As Shirley said, my name is Steve Van Buren. May 8th, 1974 was my third day on the job as a paid firefighter for the city of Poughkeepsie. Okay, 3 days on the job. Prior to that, I was a volunteer firefighter in Glenham, New York, Southern Dutchess. To this day, I'm still involved in the fire service. I'm a deputy fire coordinator for Dutchess County. I run Battalion 7, which is the southwest corner of the county, and I'm also the chief of the county hazmat team. I still stay involved from a part-time work as the fire inspector for the town of Michigan. So, May 8th, I'm going to stand back here so I can see the slide as we're going through it. So, we're out at the pool parking lot at Spratt Park, out off Wilbur Boulevard. Myself, Captain Art Boyd, and firefighter Kenny Lillis. Kenny had just gotten back from his tour in Vietnam. I had just graduated from Paris. I was very familiar with the railroad bridge because for years, out on the football practice field, I watched the trains go across it every day. And I just marveled at the length of the trains and the amount of freight that was going across. And I probably missed a couple tackles. Okay? But so we were out practicing hose lays, very basics in firefighting. And it was just around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't know the exact time. Cones went out for what it was reported as a brush fire. Well, it wasn't a brush fire. The bridge was on fire. Back in 1974, city of Poughkeepsie, like all cities in the Northeast, basically were broke. And to bring the whole services of the fire department in, they would call for a second alarm. Everybody would be getting called into work, get a minimum of 4 hours pay. And the officers were told, don't really do that. If you don't really need it, don't do that. So this fire never went beyond a special assignment. It never went to a second alarm. It never went to a third alarm. That's something about the fire service that you wonder, it was a huge fire in terms of manpower, labor required. Because you got to remember, the bridge started right there. And the only way you're going to drag hose out onto that bridge was to start right here and by manpower drag the hose out. Now, while Poughkeepsie and Arlington and the companies on this side of the river were basically going from here, I can't say enough about the guys on the western side of the river. Highland, Clintondale's here. They had a much longer walk from the west side to drag their hose out. So one of the things Shirley said, which really worked against us, was the bridge did have a standpipe system that was supposed to be kept dry, drained in the winter, so that if there was a fire, we could attach hoses to it. And we found out early on that the thing had frozen, split, and broken, and none of our water was getting out on the bridge. So everything had to be hose dragged out by hand. So that's what the bridge looks like. This is from the western side. You can see the fires over on the eastern side. And I remember as the tone started going out for special assignments, Captain Boyd said to us, get all the hose back on the engine, we're going to the fire. And we came down Hooker Avenue, and when we got to basically the intersection with Montgomery Street and South Hamilton Street, the entire sky over downtown Poughkeepsie was jet black. I couldn't believe it. I had never, I come from Glenham. How many big fires we have in Glenham, And I couldn't believe it. Looked like the whole city was on fire just from the amount of smoke that was being generated. So the guys had to go up on the bridge. The bridge was a combination of conventional railroad ties and then timber decking. And everybody know what creosote is?
Yeah.
It's a preservative, been around for 100 years. All you got to do is look at that telephone pole right there. It's soaked with creosote. Well, so were these railroad ties and this decking. So once this fire got going, basically, it's like fighting a petroleum and oil fire with all the preservatives that were in the wood. So the guys had to go out and individually had to rip up the decking and drag hose by hand to get out to the fire. Okay? If you picture the guys up there, you know, I can't remember everybody's name. I know that's John Gruner in the center. I believe that's Captain Ringwood on the bottom left. And I just forget the guy. You know, it was 50 years ago. Okay? But I know he worked on Engine 4. He was Engine 4 on North Clover Street. Jerry Murray lives right on Violet Avenue to this day. He was a captain in City Fire. I don't know if he was a captain at the time of the fire. He might have been a captain, might have been a lieutenant. One of the greatest fireground officers I ever had the opportunity to work with. You know, if you ever saw a picture of Jerry Murray at a fire, or you ever worked for him, I always thought, I'm in the FDNY, because that's the type of fireground officer he was. Top shelf. You couldn't beat him, okay? And he made some notes here.
I'm just going to read them.
You're going to read them?
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah, that's fine. So when we did this 2 years ago, we asked some of the firefighters, to give us a little summary of what happened that day. So we asked them some questions, and I have the answers here. Steve wrote a whole 2-page essay.
That's a surprise.
So this is from Captain Gerald Murray, City of Poughkeepsie Fire Department. I was on duty at the fire department, and I was sent there by the department. It was not difficult to get there. We thought maybe there would be a problem for people getting through traffic or whatever, but the firefighters seemed to get here okay. He went out on the bridge with a hose pack. The water line in the bridge was supposed to be turned on, but found the water was off. He had to come all the way back to Parker Avenue. We had to get ropes long enough to reach from the bridge to the ground so we could pull the hoses up to the bridge. He saw that the bridge was on fire, but he wasn't sure about, when he got there, what was happening. And his job was to put the fire out. He said he felt tired and overworked. He was in charge, and then he handed it over to Captain Thomas Ringwood, who had just arrived. So Gerald couldn't be here. That lovely sheet of paper up there was written by his wife in cursive for us 2 years ago. So I did cheat, though. I did print it out so I could read it. Oh, okay, so.
Here's Clintondale. The guys from Clintondale, stand up.
Stand up, James. James Whitlaw.
West side. Do you want to read what?
Yes. I'm going to read what James said. And I also had a conversation with his daughter Tammy over there. And Tammy lived with her father being a volunteer firefighter. So she was telling me, just what it was like. And she said the next day, James was working when he was called out to the... No, I think did you go, James, or were you called out to the fire? And he left his work, went to the fire, was there for hours, went home, went to bed, and got up the next day and just went back to work again. So, remarkable men. So, his name is James Whitlaw from Clintondale Fire Department, and he was 38 years on the day of the 38 years a firefighter on the day of the fire. He was at work at D&D Auto Supply New Paltz and heard it on the radio, and as soon as he got off work, he went straight to the fire to help. Didn't go home, didn't worry about dinner, just went straight to the fire to help. He went on his own to help the fire. It was not difficult because he's a firefighter and he knew they needed his help. This is how he describes. I parked as close as I could to the side of the road and walked in. I grabbed a hose and dragged it out to the fire. There was no other way to get water out to the fire. The firefighters had to drag the hoses and the trucks pumped the water. The pipes that were on the tracks were not operational. They were either disconnected or broken. We needed to fight with the hose water pumped from the trucks. I was on the bridge. And his thoughts about what he saw, the black smoke, lots of black smoke, the creosote, as Steve was telling us. His job was taking the hose out on the tracks and putting the fire out. I felt like I was just doing what a firefighter should do. So James, thank you for sharing that with us.
I'd like to applaud those guys because their hand stretch was over a mile of hose. Normally, when we lay hose from an engine, the engine goes down the street and the hose comes off the back of the hose bed. It's designed that way so we can lay 1,000 feet of hose with an engine in a matter of a minute. But this had to take, 50-foot sections of hose being dragged out by guys. A lot of work. Okay? This is my work right here. As I said, I was on engine 5. We were given the assignment to go down to the Central Hudson Gas Works, which were located under the railroad bridge on the south side. And Poughkeepsie Ladder 2 came down, and I was with engine 5, and when we get to my story, I'll talk more about that. But I'm pumping that water there, and it's probably a minimum of 500 gallons. And we were even questioning whether or not how much of that water was actually getting up to the bridge, because you got to remember the decking that was there would not allow the water to get up above it, come down on the fire. Okay, just more shots. Once again, the majority of the fire is over the land on the Poughkeepsie side. And there's a good-looking guy right there. Well, that's you, Steve. Boy,
We want you on video.
I wish I was that age right now. Okay?
Speak in here so we can get it for our video. Okay?
You want me to tell him there's a good-looking guy again?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah.
That was actually, if you know anything about firematics and rescue, if you look at the bottom left-hand side of the picture, you'll see a hydraulic pump, gasoline motor, and to the left you'll see some type of tool standing up. You can just make out the word Hearst on it. This is the Hearst Jaws of Life. You've all heard of it. In 1974, that unit was donated to the City of Poughkeepsie Fire Department by the New York State Bridge Authority. We'd had a bad wreck out on the bridge, and it took all kinds of time to do it. And that back then was about a $10,000 tool. And so there were very few of them around. But we got that, and that's a training session we did. You can see that the door is off the car, the roof is off the car. It's a fun thing to use. And I've used it many times at a lot of wrecks. So like I said before, it was my third day on the job. I just gotten sworn in on Monday. We're out at Spratt Park. We were doing hose lays. And it was around 2 o'clock. And all kinds of tones started going out. Everybody know when I say tones, what that means? Yeah. Fire departments are dispatched by a series of radio frequency tones, which open up individual pagers for the different departments or companies. How was that doing?
Right on, Steve. You're right on.
Yeah, you're right on, Steve. Of course you trained me well. Okay. So Captain Boyd said, put all the hose on the engine, we're going to the fire. And we came down, looked around you. Man, that guy drove like a madman. If I ever drove a city rig like that, they probably would have fired me. But he was the training officer. He could get away with it. And like I said, we were sent down to North Water Street to protect the Central Hudson Gas Works. And this just goes on where Captain Boyd and Kenny Lillis came up onto the bridge. I stayed under the bridge at the gas works with Poughkeepsie Ladder 2, which eventually became my full-time rig. And I was pumping to them. Ladder 2 was a 100-foot rear-mount American LaFrance, beautiful rig, 1970 American LaFrance. And that ladder was true vertical, almost 90 degrees straight up. I remember Joe Hatch was the firefighter that was on the tip of the ladder operating the ladder pipe. Everything was done by man then. Now we can put ladders up and we'll use a little toggle switch like a video game. And we can move the water around, we can rotate the nozzle up, down, side to side, change the pattern. Back then, you put a solid tip on your gun, and this is how you moved it up and down with the arm of the firefighter, 100 feet in the air on the ladder. So, like I said, I don't know how much of the water got there. We must have got enough to slow it down from continuing to go west. During the fire, Joe Hatch everything was done by hand. Nowadays, everybody has a radio. Everything was done by hand. Joe Hatch up on the ladder is signaling down. He's pointing across the arterial. And what he was pointing at was Andy and Steve's restaurant. Yeah. Andy and Steve's restaurant, a railroad tie, we had debris falling down all over the the western side of the city. It started a structure fire at the restaurant. So he's pointing it down. He gives me the signal, like, call it in on the radio. So I go get the microphone out of the engine cab and I go, Engine 5 to alarm headquarters. We got a structure fire under the bridge. So the dispatcher comes back and says, Engine 5, can you give me a better location? And I go, no, I can't, but I know it's burning. And I believe it was Lieutenant Herb Burkhardt was up on the bridge. The only ones back then that had radios were the officers. And he looked down and he was able to call it in as a structure fire, gave him the right street and address. And that ended up going to a second alarm structure fire. At the same time, we got everybody up on the bridge. So eventually, I remember getting out of there around 5:30, 6 o'clock. The fire was no longer traveling west. The guys were done a good job up above. The guys coming across from the Ulster County side had done a good job. And back then, as a new guy, I don't think I was even supposed to get overtime because I was only on training. And the shift would get over at 3. So they basically got me out of there because they didn't want to pay me. So I went home around 5:30. And like Captain Ringwood said that day at a fire, he later became chief. It wasn't the biggest fire. Stop and think. Look at the width of the bridge here. That's not that wide. Okay? So you got a forward section of the fire that's actually moving, but as you're moving out from this side, you're extinguishing fire as you go. But the key was that standpipe system that was designed for something like this. The railroad had failed to maintain it properly, and when we needed it, we couldn't use it. So we had to drag all that hose out by hand. That's Shirley Ringwood there. You can see the picture over the ground. Okay, talks about mutual aid. We got a few slides coming up here. That's Arlington's ladder. And they're on the north side of the gas works. I'm on the south side with ladder 2 and engine 5 over there. Just another picture there. Okay. And once again, on these ladder trucks that were circa 1970, when you got up to the top at 100 foot or you were on the end of the ladder, there are literally no sides. The sides were tapered. So you might have started out with 1-inch steel coming back about 3 feet. And when you got back 3 feet, you're only probably 8 inches off the main rail of the ladder. So when you're up there, there's not a lot to hold on to. Okay? So that was always, but I love being on the ladder truck. And I worked on that ladder truck in Poughkeepsie for many structure fires on Main Street. This is a great illustration of what we were up against. You got to remember, those are the ties there. What's the normal position of a tie? It's straight. Okay? Think about the heat to basically buckle those ties where they look like it's the letter S. Okay? Now, I can tell you that aluminum melts at 1200 degrees. Structural steel starts to lose its strength at about 1000 degrees, but that doesn't mean it's going to lose all of its strength. We saw that at the World Trade Center. when the fire exposed the structural steel where the fireproofing had been knocked off, that's what caused the towers to come down. Because they took the hit from the planes and they stood. But after all that fireproofing had gotten knocked off, the structural steel weakened and the weight of the fire, or the weight of the building above that steel caused it to collapse. That's a vertical collapse at World Trade Center. This I can call a horizontal collapse.
Yeah.
Think about that. But that's a true indicator. And you can see the ties and the decking, and the guys walked out to get to that fire.
Thank you so much. And this, I had to call Steve yesterday and say, Steve, can you help me? He says, absolutely. Didn't know what he was coming to, but thank you so much, Steve. Just to go back to that other slide, this is a slide that this girl actually sent to me. She read that we were having a fire, celebration 2 years ago, and she says, oh my goodness, I used to go up there every weekend with Vassar College. We used to go and party up there. She says, I think I've got a picture. And out of all the pictures, as Steve said, this really shows you the buckling and what it was like and how dangerous it must have been for these college students to go up there,
Shirley, if everybody notices where that main buckling is taking place, the side rails are gone.
Yes.
That's a 200-foot fall.
Yes. And these people were going up to party.
Well, they're from Vassar College.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. So I do thank this young lady for giving me the opportunity to put this in the slideshow. So we did have, does anybody have a story to share? So anybody want to share something that happened that day? Do you remember where you were? Here we go.
I worked at New York Telephone at 412 Main Street. And it was around 10 years.
Speak right, that's it, right into it.
I worked at New York Telephone at 412 Main Street, and around 10 after 2, everything went dead. All the phones went dead. The electric lights went off because all of the cables ran under the bridge. And it was like, it's almost like the end of the world. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And it's just a very scary thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember it like it was yesterday.
Absolutely. And talking about those cables, the people you saw on those fire trucks with the water going up, some of them were parked right by Central Hudson. So they were putting all this water up to try and get to the bridge. And guess where it was going? On all these electricity pylons and all the wires there. So they were really taking their lives in their hands to do that. Anybody else got a nice story to share? Fred? Come on over, Fred. It's not going to go that far. There you go.
Hi, everybody. I was 30 years old and working with the law firm of Corbally, Gutland, and Rapier on Market Street. And we did a lot of real estate. And I went across the street and I could watch the fire from the county office building. And I kept on going back and forth from both to watch it. And so I never knew I was going to be part of it later on. But, I remember it very well.
Thank you, and a big round of applause for Fred, who is we call him the walkway guy. It was his dream that came to fruition, and between Bill Seppi coming up with the idea and Fred and all the other people who worked on it, and then we have this absolutely wonderful bridge today. So I thank all of that original group. There is another Walkway Talk in October, because this is the 15th anniversary of the bridge. So I think that one's on the west side, so come along in October. And Fred's going to be telling us stories, and other people. If you want to be part of it, get in touch with me and we can share stories. So back to the fire. Anybody get anything else that they would like to share? Anybody else? Yeah?
Hi,
Can you?
my name is Norma, and I was a little girl at the time. My grandparents.
Speak into it so
My
it goes.
grandparents
Thank
lived
you.
right below the bridge. So I remember the day of the fire vividly. They were so afraid debris was going to fall. It's still standing. It's a beautiful red brick building. Some architect from New York bought it, and it's a beautiful condominium structure. It's right below. It's red. You can't miss it.
Oh,
But my grandparents lived there, and they owned Kokoma's grocery and meat market right below. So we remember the day very vividly.
Yeah.
And family.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? No? Okay, so I would like to just finish up, and again, let's give a big round of applause for the firefighters here and all the other people who have dedicated their life to be firefighters. Thank you for coming out today.
Shirley, as the firefighters come up for a photo.
Oh yes, yes, yeah. So we'll have all the firefighters come up and we'll get a picture, okay? And thank you all for coming out today, guys, and supporting us. All of the Walkway Talks are free, but we do have a donation jar. If anybody wants to donate, we will not say no, okay? And we're going to reopen the pavilion if you would like to see our merchandise, buy a souvenir, a sweatshirt, t-shirt, etc. Okay? Thank you so much, guys. I hope to see you at the next talk.